I have the pleasure today of introducing Tara B. Taylor for the session titled LGBTQ+ Workplace Inclusion, Awareness, Etiquette, and Best Practices. Tara Taylor is the Managing Director of ADR Vantage, Inc., a woman-owned consulting firm that supports clients across the U.S. through conflict management, organizational effectiveness, and leadership development, diversity and inclusion practices, as well as training and coaching. Tara spent 18 years directing programs for both the Maryland and Arizona Attorney General and the YMC of Delaware. Tara holds a BA in Organizational Communication and an MA in Management and Public Administration and serves as adjunct faculty at several colleges and universities. She is a dynamic speaker focused on helping audiences engage, get inspired, and walk away with ready-to-implement solutions for their professional challenges. Please join me in welcoming Tara.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so thrilled to see you. And everyone has to promise to stay awake because you just ate your lunches, right? So this is going to be that session we will keep energized. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm Tara Taylor. I use she, her pronouns, and I will tell you all about that as we move through today's content area. We've only got less than 60 minutes, so I am going to cram in as much information as I possibly can. You are going to get a load of wonderful resources in your app from here, so anything I share with you, I'm going to give you the link and give you the resource, and you'll have access to it after today. So don't worry, you've got all the information I'll be providing. So we're going to jump in. Happy Pride Month! Yay! Happy Pride Month! Thank you, thank you. I love coming into New Orleans and seeing, all the celebratory and remembrances and really just commemorating this month. This, if you haven't seen it, is the is the Progress Pride flag. So it's a combination of the transgender pride flag, the pink, light blue, and white. Black and brown are for communities of color within the LGBTQ community, and then the traditional rainbow. So it's all together. Daniel Quasar, really great graphic designer, designed this for the Philadelphia Pride in 2018. And so we've really used this as a way to signal progress within sexual and gender minoritized communities. So really excited to have that here. And we are going to jump into everything I plan to cover today if I can get to it all. So we're going to talk about lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and questioning, and other sexual and gender minoritized communities. I will try to keep saying that alphabet because I know it can be tricky, right? And the words seem to be changing a lot, so I'll try to keep saying that as well. I'm also going to give you a link to a glossary of terms in your resources, so you'll have that to refer to. But today we're going to focus on some of the lived experiences that your employees have coming into the workplace, help you kind of have a little bit more awareness there. I'm going to talk specifically about inclusive language practices, things you can walk out of this room and use today, along with pronouns and what does all that mean. Then we're going to talk about some workplace updates that are specific for you all, legal updates about what's required within the workplace, and I'll also give you links for your state, your township, your community to find out if there's extra laws that impact you. And then lastly, I'm going to give you some best practices, right? Some things to be thinking of, extras that you can add in if you aren't already. Good game plan? Yeah? All right, good to know it, good to know it. And for those of you who are online, hello, hello. I'm very excited to have this being streamed, so that makes me feel like this is an important topic for all of us. I would love for somebody in this audience to give me a guess about the percentage of LGBTQ individuals in the US right now. Who's got a percentage guess for me? 10, 7, 35, 33? 22, 45, ooh, very specific, yes. And I think in the chat, I welcome you to pop in a few of those too. I know there's a little lag time with those of us virtually. So interestingly enough, the US Census Bureau just released this data in December 2021 that roughly 8% of the US population openly identifies. So this is folks who are self-identifying. And throughout this, I'm going to remind you that not everybody does self-identify because we have a history of being marginalized, excluded, losing jobs, losing housing, right? So these are the folks who are self-identifying, but that is over 25 million people, and 88% of them are employed. So if you don't think that they are in your workplace, they are, right? And so we're going to talk about how we can connect in better ways. So I'm going to start with very quickly pulling apart 4 terms that people get all kind of confused about and have a hard time really understanding. So I thought I'm going to pull these 4 terms apart. They're the most common ones, and then give you some language to use as we move through. So these are the dimensions where people get stuck. Confusing sexuality, gender, gender identity. So I've got a couple of slides here. This first one, I want to just indicate that what we have often referred to as biological sex, your chromosomes, your DNA, your body parts, is referred to as sex assigned at birth. So if you can think back or think about when a baby's born in the hospital and the baby comes out and the doctor says, it's a girl, it's a boy, right? The physician is literally assigning the sex of a baby based on the only physical characteristic that's evident at the time, the genitalia. Because your secondary sex characteristics like facial hair, breasts, right, you can't see that. So based on what they can see at the time, they are assigning it, which may or may not be correct or the way that that child will identify. So we're going to try to pull apart body parts from who you love, from the gender that you see yourself as. Gender identity is exactly that, who you see yourself as, regardless of what society says you have to look like, dress like, act like. All right, we're going to spend a moment there in a sec. Gender expression is all the ways you show your gender to the world. Clothing, attire, the way you sit, the way you talk, right? And then sexual orientation has nothing to do with any of those 3. That's about who you love and who you care about and who you're attracted to. All right? So I am going to refer you to this lovely genderbread person. It is available online. You can Google genderbread. There's a 2.0, 3.0 version, right? I'm going to use the 3.2 version in a moment. But it's these 4 characteristics. So I want to just real quickly remind you, if you think about it like this, right? In your head, your identity is how you see yourself, right? It's your internal sense of gender, of how you want the world to see you. Whereas your sexual orientation, right, that's matters of the heart, like I said. Attraction really has very little to do with the package that you're in. You can love and be attracted to someone based on, boy, what is attraction based on if we think about that actually, right? I always tell folks, can you think back about who you were attracted to when you were maybe 15, 16, 17? That's probably vastly different than who you're attracted to now, right? And so sexuality changes over time, as can identity, as can the way you express it to the world. Then I want to talk about body parts and chromosomes, right? So this is really oftentimes what we can't tell from the outside. You don't know somebody's chromosomal makeup, their DNA, right? They often don't find that out unless they had to through a medical procedure or testing. Very different. And then gender expression, right? All the things on the outside, that dotted line, that's telling you about how you're showing yourself to the world. So I'm going to dig in one more slide for this, right? Because this is where I really want you to understand things. So, we got all these axes and pictures, right? And again, you can Google this. But let me start at the top with the blue about identity. I'm going to do an activity in a moment to help you all understand gender identity a little bit better. But identity, for so many people, is determined by your life experiences, about how you were raised, about the society that you're in and how they determine what's appropriate for male and female, right? In certain cultures, right, they don't have the same definitions that we do in the US for what is appropriate or the norm for male and female. So for example, in other cultures, it would be the male-identified individuals who would take care of children, who would stay home and do cooking, some of the traditional things that we've thought about in a female role here in the US. They may also wear clothing that is much more feminine. In fact, gender identity has shifted a lot over time. If you can think back to Elizabethan times, men were the ones that wore wigs, tights, ruffles, right? Really fancied up, and that would have been traditionally considered more feminine nowadays. So gender identity and the way we see gender has really shifted over time and across cultures. So we're going to also give you this little bubble here, right? This is all those terms that some of you have questions about: genderqueer, non-binary. I'm going to give you just an example of 2 or 3. The binary of, remember when you go to fill out a form and the checkbox says male or female? Bi means 2, male or female. They're the only 2 options. However, there are an immense amount of folks out there who don't feel like they have to fit into one or the other checkboxes. They may feel that part of them is more masculine than feminine on certain days, certain months. It may also feel like it's evolving over time. It also may feel like I don't want to have to check a box. I'm a human, I'm who I am, right? And gender doesn't have to be the number one thing that we're focusing on. It's one facet of who I am. I said to a group yesterday, we spend so much time in this country focusing on gender, right? When I had my son, the first thing people asked is, oh, it's a boy, it's a girl, right? What are you having? So I know the right clothing to buy. So I know the right colors to put in the room. And we didn't find out. And people thought that was crazy, right? Because we're driven so much by gender being the controlling factor, when oftentimes there's so much more about us, right? Our birth order, where we grew up, our culture, all of those things. But gender is that factor that we want to know right away so that we can put somebody in the box. So a non-binary person says, I'm rejecting male or female as the way to define me. I'm non-binary. I'm not one or the other. I may be identifying in my own way, but most importantly, I'm human. I'm who I am, right? So you're going to see some of these terms. I know this is a lot to throw at you, but I promise you I'll have some good resources to follow up. So you see gender fluid, gender nonconforming. All of those are terms that are used in the gender identity realm. And then I also want to talk about cisgender and transgender. How many folks have heard about cisgender? In the room, lots of hands. Online, I bet you it's very similar, right? How many have heard of transgender? All right, so that's probably why you're here, right? People want to know what these terms mean. So cis in chemistry means same or on the same side of. So if you are born and signed female at birth, like I was, and you identify as a female and the world sees you as a female, it's all the same. It all lines up. People see me the way I see myself, all the same. Trans in chemistry means opposite. So that means, for just all intents and purposes today, that the body you're in does not match the way you see yourself. Opposite. Okay? So that's where it comes from. Cis same, right? So I am a cisgender person. I was born female. People see me as female. I identify as female. All lines up, right? For somebody who does not feel that their body matches who they are, right? Trans is an umbrella term for folks who see their gender identity as different than their body. That doesn't mean that they're going to run out and have surgery. They may not. Surgery is very expensive. It is not covered by most insurance. You may have other health conditions that prevent you from having surgery, or you just might like all your body parts and want to keep those the way they are, right? You get to decide that. So just because you're transgender does not necessarily mean that you will be having a gender affirmation surgery. There's another little term, gender affirmation, not sex change. We are affirming who you were the whole time, right? Gender affirmation. So lots of words I'm throwing out at you here. Jot it down if you have a question, because I promise I'll come back. But I want to move us down to sexual orientation. Remember how I said your body gender really has nothing to do with who you love? This is because sexual orientation, who we're attracted to, who we are romantically or sexually connected to, can be different for every person. I pulled these two apart because you can want to have sex with somebody you don't want to have a romantic relationship with, and you can want to have a romantic relationship with somebody who you don't have great sexual attraction to. Right? Want to think about that for a second? Right? Okay, so I pull that apart to say, gosh, sometimes it's really hard to explain attraction. We don't know, right? We all know somebody in our life where we go, why are those two people together, right? I'm not sure any of us can explain attraction. And so that's why I want you to remember, that's why it's sexual orientation, not sexual preference, right? It's a big one to walk away from here with. I prefer to eat pizza on Friday nights. I prefer to do my laundry on Sundays, right? That's a preference. Sexual orientation, who you love, who you're attracted to, who you're oriented towards sexually or romantically, is very hard to explain and very hard to control, right? If I came up and told you, boy, I need you to be attracted to whoever, you'd be like, that's my decision, thanks, right? So that's a personal orientation. All right, let me move to biological sex. We're talking about body parts and chromosomes, right? So 98.5% of the time, the doctor assigns the matching gender to the way the person identifies later in their life. However, there are individuals who are born intersex, which means that they have sex characteristics from both male and female. They may, on the outside, have a penis, but were born with an internal ovary that you wouldn't know at the time of birth. You wouldn't know that by just looking at it. You may be born with a vagina but have a testes that's not descended, or you may find out that you have more testosterone that is typically identified with female identified folks. So intersex is you have some characteristics of both. Anybody heard the term hermaphrodite? Right? It's an old term. It's actually a physical impossibility. Hermaphrodite means you're all of female and all of male all at the same time. You can't have all those chromosomes, DNA, body parts all in one body. So it's actually an incorrect term. Intersex is the term. Most folks don't know that they're intersex until they go to have children and they find out that they have fertility issues. And maybe there's too much testosterone, too much estrogen, something else going on internally. But there is a portion of the population. So all of a sudden, right, sex and gender is like, whoo, blowing your mind, right? There's so much more out there than what we thought. But I hope that this sort of gives you a little bit, of perspective. If you Google Genderbread 3.2, it's going to give you all the descriptions and more. So put that in your resources, right? I have a link for it in your resource guide. And I want to spend maybe 90 more seconds on gender identity to help you all really walk away with this one. So we're going to do something here online and in the room. I want in the room for you to raise your hand if you exercise, work out, go to a gym, play a sport, are on a team with any regularity. Just anybody who exercises, walks, runs, swims. And put a number 1 in the chat if you're virtual. Put a number 1. Keep those hands up. Ooh, lots of us. Healthy, yes, I love it. All right. And I'm betting you my colleague and dear friend, Dr. Shauna Payne-Gold, is running the chat for me, who is also a DEI consultant. And so she's probably seen lots of 1s in the chat. This time I want you to raise your hand or put a number 2 in the chat if you write regularly. Emails, letters, reports, correspondence, notes, anything like that. And it can be, handwritten or typed. Yeah, just about everybody here does writing. All right? Lots of 2s in the chat, I'm sure. Now I want you to raise your hand if you cook, grill, bake, have made a meal, anything like that. Anybody follow a recipe? Anybody cook from the... Oh, everybody, look at all that. Number 3 in the chat for that. Lots of 1s, 2s, and 3s. Perfect. All right, now we're going to go back. Going back to that purple. If you said you exercise, work out, play on a sports team, how many of you consider yourself an athlete? What? Okay. I had a little half hands up there. So I have this perspective. There's like 3 of you who claimed the athlete title. All right. And I would love to know that in the chat. You can put a number 1 if you consider yourself an athlete. I'm imagining it's far fewer. All right. Now, if you wrote correspondence, typed emails, reports, if you raised your hand for the writing, how many of you consider yourself a writer? Put a number 2 in the chat if you're virtual in this room. Okay, 12 people maybe. I'm going to estimate that. 10, 12, far fewer. All right, last one. You're going to put a 3 in the chat or raise your hand. For those of you who cook, bake, grill, who's my chefs? Put a 3 in the chat if you consider yourself a chef. Oh, only like 3. Really? All right. Well, interesting. So many people raise their hands for the behaviors, the action. Why didn't you claim the identity that I put up on the board? Why didn't you say I'm a chef, I'm an athlete, I'm a writer? Somebody share their answer. You rose your hand for all the activities, but you didn't raise your hand for the label. Yes, please. Don't have that level of expertise. Okay. And if you're in the chat, please put your answer too. Who else? Why didn't you raise your hand? Yes, ma'am.
I just don't feel like I identify. Like, yeah, I can cook, but I ain't no chef.
Okay. So it's just not, you just don't identify. It's not you. Yes, ma'am.
It's not my actual
It's not your job title. Okay, interesting. Who else? Who else has some? Yes, ma'am, please. Lack of confidence in the ability. I want to point out something that I'm saying every time I say yes. What am I saying? Who was listening? Well, I said that's correct, but I'm saying yes, ma'am. Do I know that those folks are ma'am? Oh, right? I could be misgendering 4 or 5 people right here. So easy to do it, right? I'm from Maryland, but the southern part, and that we do the ma'am and sir too, I'm just going to tell you, and I know I'm in the South, but I want to point out something really well. Right now, here's this learning moment, right? You do something like that and you go, wait a minute, I could really be getting this wrong. So I'm going to apologize to everybody that I ma'amed, that I may have gotten wrong, and I'm going to try to do better and not do it this time. All right, so you all watch out for me, I'll watch out for you, but this is a quick learning of how you can correct right in the moment. So who else has an answer? Why didn't you pick it up?
It's what I do, not who I am.
It's what you do, not who you are. Fascinating, please.
I was gonna say, don't fit in the box.
Don't fit in the box, it's just that's the box and that's not yours. Anybody else? Nobody said I don't, oh yes, please.
Because the world tells us who's an athlete, who's a chef, who's a writer, and we either identify or we don't.
Doesn't that stink? Well, I would posit that interestingly, identity doesn't always match behaviors, actions, appearance, right? Outward expression. I loved when I asked some of you who raised your hands, you literally, like your bodies went, chef, that's not me, right? I think you said it over here, like, that's just not how I identify, right? And I want you to remember that the next time you're thinking about somebody who doesn't identify with the binary, the check boxes we've given of male and female, right? It's up to them to decide their own identity and who they are. We don't get to do it for them. Just like you get to decide, am I a chef? Am I a writer? Am I an athlete, right? I want you to remember that feeling, and what would it be like if somebody was telling you you were all those things all the time and you knew they were wrong? That's not who I am, right? That's what gender identity is. Each of us individually gets to decide what identity and what labels we pick up for ourselves, okay? All right, we are going to keep moving, giving you some lived experiences. I just want to give you some stats because employees are coming into your workplaces with this as their background. Hate crimes, the FBI reports that come out every year, hate crimes have been on the rise since 2014. Every year they have increased against LGBTQ individuals and against other protected classes of folks. Roughly 20% of all hate crimes are against folks under sexual orientation and gender identity, LGBTQ+, right? 20%. It's really shocking that that continues to be the case. And so why wouldn't there be fear of violence, worries about safety in the workplace? Interestingly, transgender work experience is even worse at times. 1 in 4 transgender people have lost a job due to bias. More than 3 in 4 have experienced actual workplace discrimination. 3 in 4, right? And it's often because people are refusing to hire them, making different decisions, not promoting them, violating their privacy and talking about their medical history, right? And even incidences of sexual and physical violence. I spent almost 20 years with the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights that enforced anti-harassment and anti-discrimination in employment cases, and every single year I had cases not just of bias in the workplace, but sexual and physical violence in the workplace against LGBTQ workers. I've seen it every year for the last 20 years I've been involved, right? So it's not, I hope one day it's going away, but it's certainly not getting as better as I had hoped. Over 45% of all employees, LGBT and non-LGBT, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, I'm going to keep saying those words a little bit, report hearing anti-LGBT remarks in the workplace. That's almost half, right? They're hearing it happen in the workplace. 1 in 3 employees have either experienced or witnessed LGBTQ plus discrimination. 1 in 10 employees have heard their own supervisor be the one who makes the negative comments, right? How safe, how welcomed, how included do you feel if your supervisor's the one who's making those negative comments, right? 1 in 10 have actually left their job because they thought that the environment they were in was not accepting of them. And this is a big one for me too. 1 in 5 LGBTQ workers don't attend work social events. You know, the barbecue in the summer, the happy hours, the informal ways that people network and connect and get FaceTime in front of leaders. They're missing out on this oftentimes because they're wondering, how accepted will I be? Right? I've worked on many task forces to implement anti-discrimination legislation. I've worked with many individuals who have literally counterfeited their private life in order to be accepted in the workplace. I'm going to change the pronoun of my wife to my husband to make sure that I don't out myself or people don't think a certain way, right? I've worked with lots of folks who have literally done that their entire careers, and how much energy must it take to constantly be thinking about flipping those pronouns? Who can I say something to? Am I allowed to talk about what I did on my weekend, right? For fear of not being accepted and included. And all of this leads to a stat that I have shown over and over again. 48 to 50% of LGBTQ workers are not out at work. They may be out with their families, they may be out with community members, with friends, but not at work because of the perception or the reality that it's just not safe enough, right? It's not safe enough maybe for me physically, mentally. It may also not be safe enough for me to get advancement in the job, right? So again, I say, if you don't think you know somebody in the workplace, you likely do. You also likely know folks who have children who are parts of the LGBTQ community, or who have aunts, uncles, sisters, brothers, parents, right? So it's not just the people you work with, but the communities and families that they're a part of as well. Lots of information. Are you ready for the legal stuff? Whew, I'm doing good. I'm a little over a half an hour. What do we think? Lots of information? Okay. All right. Good notes. So this is the important stuff, right? I want you to walk away knowing some of the legal requirements in the workplace. So I want to ask you, and in the chat you can put yes or no, is there a federal law that protects LGBTQ plus workers from employment discrimination? Is there a federal law? Okay, a little mix. Yes? Raise your hand. You can put a 1 in the chat if you think yes. Okay, not so many. How about no? Raise your hand. You can put a 2 in the chat if it's no. And if you don't know, put both your hands up. Yes, right? So a lot of people didn't raise their hands, and that's okay, right? Because this is complicated. So the answer is yes, but. All right? Yes, but. So many of you are familiar with Title VII, right? Civil Rights Act of 1964. This is the federal law that protects workers from employment discrimination. But it only protects so many groups of people. This is race, age, gender, disability, right? These are the ones you normally hear of. Unfortunately, though, sexual orientation and gender identity are not specifically protected in Title VII. It's not codified, it's not written in, right? So they are not formally in that list. And the federal law only applies to employers with 15 or more employees. Really important to remember that. Federal law only applies to 15 or more employees. So smaller businesses, private things, that doesn't apply. So they could legitimately be discriminating, and it would be legal to fire, not hire, not promote, right? So there's gaps in this federal law. Now, interestingly, 2020, June, right? There was no clarity on the law. It wasn't written into the law. But then there was a historic Supreme Court decision that some of you might remember, Bostock versus Clayton County. This is when the Supreme Court ruled that the Civil Rights Act will now protect gay, lesbian, transgender employees under the protected category of sex. In the past, it was for male-female discrimination, sexual harassment, right? But now they're saying, no, this is specifically also for anti-LGBTQ discrimination. So although it's not written into law, the case law now is on the side of protection, okay? 2 caveats to this. One is, again, only 15 or more employees, so we still got this big gap in small employment situations where you have less than 15 employees, and there's still a lot of case law that's happening right now where employees are arguing that having to work with someone who is LGBTQ is infringing on their religious freedoms and their religious rights. So far, those cases have not gone anywhere, and it's because of this. People are often arguing that the company has a religious affiliation, and that's not how employment law works. You can't say just because the owner of a business is a certain religious affiliation that the company has that same religious affiliation. You can't put a personal or an individual identity characteristic onto an entity or an organization. So it's great that the owner of the business is saying, this is my religious belief, I can't, tough luck, in the work situation, the company can't have that same religious identification because it's an entity. All right, so that's why those cases have lost so far. But it does take a lot of time, and they go through the courts, right? And I don't know how things will pan out, but so far, that argument has not worked. We also have the Equality Act that's pending, and if you all haven't heard of this, basically what the Equality Act will do is add sexual orientation and gender identity to Title VII, to the Civil Rights Act. So it will be written in as formal codified protections. So if it goes forward, it will be in there. But right now, it is not. So we rely on case law, we rely on the courts to hopefully allow us to continue to protect LGBTQ workers without it being written into the law. Okay? Now, just because the federal law is that way doesn't mean that your state might not have protections. So you're going to have a link to this map. It's from the Human Rights Campaign, hrc.org. All of the darkest blue states, 22 states in DC, have a state law that protects against discrimination in the areas of sexual orientation and gender identity and expression. The other colors that are on there might mean you either have no protections in your state or you only have partial protections. So maybe you only protect sexual orientation and not gender identity. Maybe you only protect federal and state workers, government workers, and not private workers. All right, so you will have a link to this at hrc.org, and you can literally just go into maps and pull up your state and see everything that applies for your state. Super easy, it'll be on my resource list. I created a nice list for you all the links for this, okay? So that means that even though we're hoping the federal law will continue to protect folks, a lot of states don't protect it. And how safe do people feel if their own state doesn't offer those protections? So as HR folks, you really want to know about that. And your city or township may also have extra protections. So knowing what applies and where your workers are located. I want to show you a couple legal documents that are really important for HR folks to know about. Right now, there are 22 states and DC that allow gender X, which is just not male or female, so it'll say MF gender X, to be on a driver's license. So either when you first get it or you can change it to have gender X. So if you require a license for any kind of onboarding, any paperwork, I want you to be aware that that may be something you start to see. And if your software system, anything like that doesn't match up, that's something to go to your IT and your software folks and go, hey, this is coming, what are we going to do about this, right? And what does that mean for any other system where you track gender? So it's there. Interestingly, in the US, all passports now can have gender X as well. All passports in all 50 states. So you may have a passport that has gender X, a driver's license that has female, and a birth certificate that looks different because in that state they only allowed male and female. So there can be inconsistency across the documents, and that's something really important. Now, oftentimes folks will use health insurance cards as like the factor, and health insurance just isn't up with this. There's not a lot of gender X options in most health insurance providers. So I would expect that you're going to have some inconsistency. And just to be thinking, I don't have all the answers to this, but how do you want to handle it, right? Having that conversation early on. The other thing to be aware of is with COVID vaccinations, if any of you are still dealing with that, interestingly, the CDC requires that cards show the sex assigned at birth, but pharmacies are asking for gender and allowing people to check it off. So again, you could have another inconsistent form where it doesn't match up to the system. Now, this was going to be more important when we were going to have, like passes on your phone to see if you could travel state to state. But if any of you are requiring vaccinations or boosters and any kind of formality to report it to the CDC, you want to be aware that there may be a disconnect. Okay? All kinds of interesting stuff. Let's talk bathrooms. I have 25 minutes. Are you ready? All right. Bathrooms. Everybody asked me about it. I just gave you some really good symbols of like different ways that I've seen gender inclusive or all gender restrooms. That one at the bottom left is actually a picture I took of on a piece of paper that somebody put outside the door, right? I know some of you control the facilities, the bathrooms in the facilities you work, and others you're borrowing space, and it's not your job to provide the bathroom signage, right? But you can put a paper sign up if you want to indicate that you are being inclusive. But here's what the law is all about, all right? Let me get real clear on this. I've provided you a link in your resources to OSHA's 4-page guidelines for transgender workers in bathrooms. It's a great document. If you've never seen it, you can just Google it right now. OSHA bathroom guidelines. Download it. It has all these great answers for you. EEOC has a 2-page guidance with Q&A for every workplace. That you don't have to be government. They're just giving guidance. So here is the core principle, right? All employees, including transgender, right, should have access to restrooms that correspond with their gender identity. Should, right? Not might, may, it's should. And then there's 3 really core facets to this that I always want to point out for folks. Employees cannot be asked to provide any medical or legal documentation of their gender identity in order to have access to a gender-appropriate restroom. You cannot request that. They do not have to provide it to you. Employees should not be required to use segregated facilities, right, from other employees just because of their transgender status or gender identity. So you can't say to a transgender employee or someone who is transitioning in the workplace, you go use the bathroom that's way over in the corner, right, in the back, right? You can't force them to use a separate facility. Employees may not be limited to using facilities that are an unreasonable distance or travel time from the employee's work site. So you can't put it, universities were the first ones to do this, and they were really good. They wanted to make sure they had gender inclusive restrooms, but they were putting them like in the staff lounge behind a locked door. Well, how's the student gonna get to that, right? So you gotta be thinking about not making it unreasonable for the transgender employee. The protections are for the LGBTQ community. Just like if we were talking about sexual harassment, you wouldn't send the victim or the potential victim of sexual harassment to move their job or change their hours. You would deal with the person who is committing the act or the harassment, right? You don't want to do anything that can be perceived as a negative employment action. So be careful that you're not telling the person who is being marginalized that they have to go do something different, okay? There are a ton of questions about the bathroom. I know that. That's why I've given you the links for OSHA's guidelines. But I also want to mention to you that all the way back in April 2015, the EEOC had a case, and they issued a finding basically saying that just because other employees are uncomfortable isn't a reason for you to make the transgender employee or anybody else use a separate restroom. It's very specific in that ruling. Right? And it's in that link I gave, that's going to be in your resources. So if you got leadership who's fighting you on this, you pull it right out. Look, we're going to get in trouble. We're going to have an EEOC complaint against us. Says it right here, right? Pull that out, because discomfort is not what motivates us in HR, right? Everybody's uncomfortable all the time, right? But we're at work. We're at work, and there are rules and policies that we have to follow. If you can hearken back to a time when people didn't want to work with somebody who was a different race or a different religion, it was the same arguments. It's not going to be safe in that bathroom. They're going to be violent in that bathroom. I don't want to be with those people, right? My civil rights goosebumps just came out, right? All those years of working in that. It's the same argument. So be thoughtful that we are not dictating to the people who are uncomfortable rather than the people that the law protects. Okay? Lots more on that. The simple solution, you have 2 options for bathrooms. One is single stall locked bathrooms, right? Just like a disability accommodating bathroom, it's 1 stall, it locks, there's 1 toilet in there, and you can make that an all gender restroom. You can just put a toilet on the sign. Surprisingly, right? Actually, in Europe, there's just toilet signs. It doesn't have a lot of male and female bathrooms, right? The other thing is, for multi-stall bathrooms, like are here in this facility, there are ways that you can extend the doors, put privacy panels in between that little gap that's there. You can extend it down to the floor. There's urinal walls that come out at a further extension and have temporary doors that lock, right? OSHA will help you. There is a number on the resource I gave you where you can just call them and say, here's what I'm trying to do. Help me, tell me where the best fit is. It's very, very cost efficient. It's not expensive to do this. Single stall bathrooms or multi-stall, and you extend the privacy portions so that it goes up to the wall, down to the bathroom, done. And that's, again, in the OSHA guidelines. All right, I know you have tons more questions, but I have lots more stuff to share, so we're going to keep going, all right? Inclusive language and pronouns. Let me hit it for you because pronouns, right, they matter. Just like getting somebody's name right matters. Your pronouns are part of your identity of who you are. It would be terrible to continually mispronounce or misspell someone's name over and over. That's what it would be like to get somebody's pronouns wrong over and over. So if you are a traditional triangle person, you identify as a triangle, you typically that's a female identified person. You're probably used to using she, her, and hers pronouns. If you're more of a rectangle person, male identified, you might be used to using he, him, and his. And for most of us, that works out. However, there are folks who, again, don't identify with the binary of just male, just female, and their pronouns, they want to reflect that. So I'm going to share with you this little chart. There are a ton of different pronouns that are out in the world, but the top two are the traditional male and female, right? He, him, and his, she, her, and hers. The bottom two, the yellow and the pink, are the most common non-binary pronouns. The yellow is they, so using the plural word they to replace the singular, right? Interestingly, in 2019, Webster's Dictionary added they as their word of the year to replace the singular he or she. Now, as HR folks, you all have done this your entire career when you don't want to reveal who you're talking about. So I might come over and go, you know, I had this employee, they've been late every day this week. I'm using the plural for the singular because I don't want to identify them by name. So we're used to this. We've got this. You've been doing yellow. Look at this. Give yourselves a hand. Yay! Right? We have been doing the yellow all along. And now it's in the dictionary, right? So you can use it in writing as well. Z, here, and here's. Here is H-I-R. Here's is H-I-R-S. Z. So Z would replace he or she. That is the other set of pronouns that has become most popular. Now, if I do this in 6 months, that might change. But I would say that these two have risen to the top in this country, and I see Z, here, and here's more in Europe than I do in the US. They is typically the most common. So you might see that some of you, I didn't get this in the speaker room, but they had my pronouns are, right? You might see some people walking around with that yellow label, right? There's a hint. You don't have to require people to share their pronouns because, again, you don't necessarily want to require that people out some part of themselves. So take note, you don't have to require it, and I wouldn't recommend it. However, it is a way to show that you get that pronouns are important, and you're welcoming somebody to share it with you if they want. So that's what it signals to somebody. You're going to see it, if you haven't already, on email signature lines. And if you notice mine, I have a little link to mypronouns.org because people will be like, what's this? Why are you sharing your pronouns? Oh, well, you can just click on that and find out. You don't even have to ask me, right? So I love that, right? I love to put a resource there for folks. You're going to see it on business cards if you haven't. It's a choice, right? Virtual platforms. Ooh, I love this one. You can click on the 3 dots in Zoom and rename yourself. You can do it in Teams. You can do it in Adobe Connect. All of them will allow you to do this to signal that you get it, right? Those of you who are on the virtual platform right now, you can change yours and add your pronoun just to try it out, right? All kinds of ways to do this. You can do it on your social media profiles. So LinkedIn now has an option. I used to have to write it next to my name. Now they have a drop down and you can select your pronouns. Super easy, okay? So lots of ways that it's going to start to show up in your life. How do you know what pronouns to use for somebody? Well, I give you 2 options. Either offer it up like I did when I got up here. Hi, I'm Tara Taylor. I use she, her pronouns. Feel free to let me know if there's pronouns that you want me to use for you. I didn't say real pronouns, different pronouns. I just said, feel free to let me know if you have pronouns you want me to use for you. Okay, I'm welcoming that in. And yes, it's awkward the first 10 times you do it. And then you're like, oh, this is just the thing I do. I just add my pronouns in, right? Practicing it, right? It's like anything else, practicing it makes it easier. Or you can ask, what are your pronouns, right? It's okay to ask that. What pronouns would you like me to use for you? Try it, okay? Try it, you might like it, right? It's okay to try it and see how it feels for you. But again, it's a way to connect with folks and to not exclude what might be going on for them. This is another one, right? We just talked about the sir and ma'am, and my fix was to leave it out. And I know that's hard when that's how you were raised, and it's a cultural connection. Boy, it goes really deep, and I get it. And if you've ever misgendered somebody, that's a really sticky situation to get out of too. So it's like pick your poison there, right? And I am working really hard to be as inclusive, to reduce as many barriers as I can, to create the kind of environment where I want people to stay. So if that small thing helps, that's what I'm working on. So just dropping it off. It's so nice to meet you, right? Put the emphasis on the you. This is my other one that gets me every time. I don't know if you all have heard this 15 times at this conference. I certainly have. Hey guys, how's it going? Right? Go through that Expo booth. Hey guys, right? The reason I know that's a heavily non-inclusive term and heavily gendered is if I came in and said, hey, gentlemen, get out your pens and papers, right? The ladies would know that's not them. But if I said, hey, guys, everybody get out your pens and papers, everyone who's female identified in here knows, oops, wait, that means me too, right? But it doesn't work the other way around. So if I said, hey, ladies, get out your pens and papers, the male identified folks aren't doing that, right? So that's how I know. So, you can walk away right now today and use this one, right? My kids catch me all the time. That's their job. Mom, you said it again. Oh, sorry. Kiddos, let's go. Let's get our shoes on, right? They're catching me. Find an accountability partner, somebody to watch out to make sure you're doing some of these small things that are inclusive moments, right? The small things add up to big stuff. Hi, folks. Hi, everybody. Hi, team. Hey, colleagues. This is a good checklist. Right? We've talked about a few of these. The stuff in the red is kind of things to avoid. The stuff in the green is maybe to work into your vocabulary. Switching from maternity and maternity to parental. Husband, boyfriend, even spouse sometimes doesn't apply. But I would say partner, significant other. Right? That way you're not unincluding folks who aren't married or who aren't formalizing their marriage in that way or their union in that way. Right? All different words here. That last one, avoiding sexual preference. Making sure you use sexual orientation, because that one phrase is going to tell somebody you don't get it. First time you say sexual preference, they're like, nope, that's not my people. They're not going to get it. This is not an HR person who knows what's going on, right? All right, look at us, 11 minutes. I know that you are thinking about your questions, but I want to share with you some really good best practices around data. Right? Because how many of you have to collect data? Oh, yes, so many of us, right? Whether you're reporting to a funder, whether you're collecting it for your higher ups, right? Whether you're doing tracking of some kind. Oftentimes, the male and female boxes come up. It's the second thing we ask after name, right? On almost every form. So I'm always thinking about how can I make sure that even my data, even when I'm not present, I'm communicating inclusion, right? And so here are some options that you can have on forms that require gender. You can simply ask an open-ended, what is your gender, and give more than the male or female box. I even gave a prefer to self-describe with a fill in the blank, and a prefer not to say. And I'll say often for HR folks, really think about, do you need that information and what do you need it for, right? When I was signed up to speak, they asked my gender. And I was like, what does that have something to do with me speaking, right? I think it was just on the form, but it was a male and female box at SHRM. And I will appreciate all the setup folks, Wendy Fong here. She emailed the right people, and I was like, so I feel like that form's not as inclusive as it could be. And it would be, bad of me to maybe not say it. So I emailed, they changed the form, boom, that easy. I mean, this happened real time, just this year. And why do they need it, right? I'm not quite sure. So ask yourself, do I really need to know gender and what am I using it for? Oops, let me go back here. What is your gender at the bottom, right? Or what gender do you identify? Or just how do you identify, right? Or which of these best matches your identity, right? There's lots of ways you can ask a question that doesn't lock somebody into the binary. And then I hate seeing this one. I'm feeling very unfair to this side of the room. I'm going to come over here and be with you. All right, I was way over on that side. This is always the default, right? Male, female, or other, right? Are you African American, Caucasian, Asian, right? It was like the 5 categories for the federal government, but everybody else was another, right? If you're anything else, you're just another. Nobody wants to be othered, right? Nobody wants to be an other. I mean, it just makes you feel like you don't count for anything, and it's getting looped into some, bin of information that goes nowhere. So if nothing else, take the other off your forms. That's an easy one. The Miss, Mr., and Mrs., oh, this is one that gets me all the time, right? Do Misters ever change? Oh, you're a Mister from day one, aren't you? You get to hold on to that Mister, right? Except for the female identified folks, not only do you know our marital status, but you also know our age based on the honorific. And we have held on to that, right? So it's really interesting, the little things that we communicate. So be thoughtful about that. Here's a letter, right, or an email. You could just simply say, dear full name, dear Tara Taylor, right? You don't have to have the Mr. or the Mrs. It's my full name. Or you could greet me as applicant, client, customer, friend, right? To substitute the role for the Mr. or Mrs. Lots of simple ways to do this when you're doing correspondence. How about your HRIS systems or any other software system? A lot of them are preventing us from adding in extra options. So here's one, it was male or female, and it had sex next to it, right? So what they did was, there's a little question mark, and you can add this into your HRIS system and many other software systems for HR, where it's a pop-up box. And the box basically says, hey, we get that this identity may not best match you. Here's why we're collecting it, and we're really working on switching this. And then it has a little thing, if you can see, add gender information, blue. It's a little plus, it's a plug-in that you add. So then they can tell you any other information you want. Okay? So there are ways to work with your software systems, with your IT company. You just have to ask for it. You gotta be prepared for it, right? Emails is another big one. When we are collecting information from folks, they're often using their email. That's how we track them. That's how we assign them. Honestly, when folks come right in with onboarding, it's one of the first things we assign to them is an email. However, if there's a name change happening for a transgender individual, they need to make sure that the email matches their chosen name, right? So if they are going from Sam to Sally, it would be a repetitive, what I consider a macroaggression. I don't like that word micro, as if they're tiny, but the macroaggression is to see a name that is not your name used over and over, right? And so you want to make sure you get something as simple as that right. Be prepared to adapt to name changes. You've done it before. People get married and divorced all the time. We change names all the time. We have Christophers we call Chris. We have Rebeccas we call Becky's. We do it all the time, right? So don't set up a barrier that's an artificial one for your trans folks in the workplace. Trans is an umbrella term for transgender, transsexual, where you might have a sex change assignment. So I'm using trans not as like a slur, but as an umbrella term. So you can use trans as well. Work with your IT or your software provider ahead of time to plan for this. If it hasn't happened, it will. So think about how you can have that conversation, right? And then I'm going to leave you with a couple best practices so that you can ask questions. So best practices for all of us, right? If you are just simply more mindful and putting this, I love that this room is full, right? It means you're being mindful of it. It means that somehow, some way, you know this is important and you're here, right? So being more mindful, learning more about the lived experiences of LGBTQ individuals, that means talking to folks, right? And that means not waiting for it to be at the workplace. You can reach out to an LGBTQ support group. You can reach out to a local PFLAG chapter, Parents and Friends of Gays and Lesbians. They're all across all 50 states. It's for families who are in support of someone who has come out. You can reach out to local advocacy organizations, to your LGBTQ commerce office, right? There are businesses specifically for LGBTQ owned businesses. all of that is good relationship building so that you can learn and get from them, not just always be taking, right? You want to give them, and so it's a reciprocal relationship to learn. Also, becoming more familiar with the language terms. So HRC.org, humanrightscampaign.org, has a glossary of terms. I've given you the link to it in the resources. You can also literally Google LGBTQ glossary. There's tons of them out there. The Anti-Defamation League has a really good list. So if you forget what gender queer is, or gender nonconforming, who wants to know about using the word queer? All right, good, because I think some of you, when you hear me say Q, you're like, ooh, am I allowed to say queer? It depends, is my answer for this one, all right? So queer has a long history of being hateful, of being exclusionary. It was used as a slur and an epithet and thrown at people, right? What has happened is, just like a lot of other communities, the repurposing of the word, the reclaiming of it, right? You're going to use it for me in hate, I'm going to take it back and own it as a prideful term. Right? And that's happened in other communities. Communities of color have repurposed words that have been used as hate, right? The trick is, if you're not in that group, in-group versus out-group status, if you're not in the group and it's not been okay for you to use that word, then you can't just come in and call somebody queer, right? It only depends on whether they are okay with you calling it and they've told you it's okay to do that. Because what happens is, if you think you can do that, people might overhear you and still hear it as a hateful term, and then suddenly everybody's confused about what it really means. So just be thoughtful that, I mean, there's literature of the queer now at college classes. There's celebrations of queer pride within Pride Month. And it is a reclaiming the power of that word for good rather than for the negative, okay? Examine your own department's policies and practices. I know that you have a sexual harassment policy. I am hopeful you have an anti-harassment in other ways policy. You have an EEO statement. You should have something specifically on LGBTQ anti-harassment that has some teeth to it. So it's not good enough to say, we accept everybody, we don't discriminate. Yeah, but what do you do if people are discriminating? So what's the repercussion? Have that in the policy. And then lastly, get more inclusion education yourself. Workshops like this, right? We crammed in 58 minutes of stuff into this. There's a million more. Yesterday I did 4 hours as a pre-conference session and we went into everything, right? So there's opportunities for this. I come all over the country to share this with folks, and we drill it down for your organization. The walk away I want you to have for today, if you do nothing else, always act as if an LGBTQ person is present. Because they're part of families and communities and networks. And if you do that, you will be naturally more mindful. You will be thinking of, what am I doing that could be potentially exclusive, inclusive, excluding, right? All there. So be aware, and you can always contact me if you have questions. I am super proud of myself because I have 90 seconds left, and I would love to take questions from you. Thank you. Who has a question, something specific? This is your space. We won't judge you. Yes, please.
I thought about this when you were talking about the name change.
Yeah.
Would it be okay if you ask for a social security card as documentation? That's what we do when there's a marriage or divorce. Is that appropriate to say, or are there things that we should be aware of that may prevent that from being changed?
Social security cards. Yeah, so social security
Can you
cards.
please repeat the question for
Yes,
the 500 online people?
Thank you. So, 500. So the question is, can you ask for Social Security as a legal documentation? And yes, I'm sure you can. Social Security cards don't provide gender. So if you need something that provides gender, you might want to think about, what is it? Are you accepting a passport? Are you accepting a driver's license? And what are you going to do if they don't match? If one has gender X and one has a sex assigned at birth. I don't know if that was the answer to the question, but certainly come up afterwards. I've got a question here and then one in the back.
Can we
Yes, ma'am.
use the microphones, please, for our online audience?
Thank you.
I was just going to say to the gal who just asked the question, some people in some states have a very hard time getting their name change recognized, so you do want to have an HR practice of finding a way to let them use their preferred name
Yes.
prior to proving it through documentation.
Yep. Yep. And I'd also use the term chosen name instead of preferred name. Preferred indicates that you have a choice. It's like optional if you use my name or not. So I'll often use chosen instead of preferred, and that's great. HRC.org maps is going to give you what your state requires around those documents. Thank you. There was a question. Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Do you have any suggestions for organizations who want to have the option for male, female, non-binary, and other options, but need to report to EEOC? Because we do have to identify male or female, which is difficult when you're giving the options outside of that.
Yep, so two things. One is you can have it so that it's not a locked field where they have to choose one or the other. They could leave it blank, but I know that that might cause a reporting issue. What we've done is the pop-up. So the HRIS slide that I showed you with a little pop-up, and it says, because I worked for the Civil Rights Commission for 20 years in Maryland, which was the partner for EEOC. So we would say, we recognize that these options may not best match your identity. However, we've been required by this federal partner to report based on these two. Please indicate the one with which best identifies. Yep. So that's all you can do, right? We're trying to change those systems.
What should we be reading? What should be some good resources for us to be reading that are going to help us?
Yeah, that's a great question. So on your resources, it'll be here later today, I've curated an entire resource list of links and readings. But I would say to start with, the humanrightscampaign.org, hrc.org, has lovely stories, resources. You can search and filter by the topic you're interested in, policies, maps, data, right? I would start with them. And then there's a lot of advocacy organizations, depending on what type of work you do, that can provide that. But don't miss out on that resource list because it's got everything listed.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a couple online questions, Tara.
Please.
Christian Bliss asks, how do we navigate the gender versus insurance dilemma? Insurance companies are big on gender because it impacts their rates, et cetera. How do we navigate that?
Yeah, you seek out your senator and your congressman. No, it's a great question. Thank you for that. So you're right. Insurance is going to be dictated. Unfortunately, they haven't caught up to the rest of the laws yet. So what I would suggest is you all decide what is the legal documentation that you need other than health insurance, and to make sure that you let employees know when they're onboarding that unfortunately most insurance providers are going to request sex assigned at birth. However, you get that their gender identity may differ from that, and you welcome that information, right? So it's about welcoming it, but also letting them know that certain providers are going to require it. Even just using the correct terminology, sex assigned at birth, is going to be helpful because they're going to get that you get it. I wouldn't say your real gender, that's the stuff that'll get you in trouble. Thank you. Is there another question?
I have one more online question, and we do need to wrap it up. So this may have been answered online already, but I'm going to ask you as well. Is it recommended, best practice, to ask employees their sexual orientation these days?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So do we ask it for heterosexual folks? There's your answer, right? So I don't think that is a necessity in most systems. If you are using it because a health insurance provider has asked for that, if you're in healthcare and that would be important for the provider to know in some way, I'd really think on that though. Because most of the time, if we're not asking for someone's sexual orientation, why would we do it, right, to somehow change it? Now, if you want to be making sure that you're providing certain information, you can make it optional. So we collect demographic data on our employees, right? And we want to make sure that we're being as inclusive as possible. So you can ask that question just like you would ask race, age, religion, other things, but always make it optional for them to identify. Because what they want to know is, how's this information going to be used? Who's going to see this information? How could it possibly harm me down the line? So if you're being transparent about what it's used for, then that's the best way to go at it. All right, I know you all have other sessions. I am here for anybody that has a question, and I so appreciate your time. And if I got anything wrong, come up and tell me, please.